Original research article published in Sports Medicine Open. The effects of a bicarbonate hydrogel system for the delivery of bicarbonate mini tablets on acid-base buffering and gastrointestinal symptoms in resting well-trained male cyclists by Lewis A. Goat and S. Andy Sparks. Abstract. A new commercially available sodium bicarbonate supplement claims to limit gastrointestinal discomfort and increase extracellular buffering capacity. To date, no available data exists to substantiate such claims. Therefore, the aim of this study was to measure blood acid-base balance and GI discomfort responses following the ingestion of sodium bicarbonate using the novel bicarb system, MSB. 12 well-trained male cyclists completed this randomized crossover design study. Maximal oxygen consumption was determined in visit 1, whilst during visits 2 and 3, participants ingested 0.3 grams of sodium bicarbonate per kilogram body mass using MSB, Morten Sweden, or vegetarian capsules, CSB, in a randomized order. Finger prick capillarity blood samples were measured every 30 minutes for pH, bicarbonate, and electrolytes, potassium, chloride, calcium, and sodium, for 300 minutes. Visual analog scales were used to assess GI symptoms using the same time intervals. Results. Peak blood bicarbonate was 0.95 millimole per liter greater following MSB, with the time peak to blood bicarbonate achieved 38.2 minutes earlier, and remained elevated for longer. No differences were observed for any electrolytes between the conditions. Aggregated GI discomfort was reduced by 79 arbitrary units following MSB, with MSB reducing stomach cramps, bowel urgency, diarrhea, belching, and stomach ache compared to CSB. Conclusions. This is the first study to report that the Morten bicarb system can increase buffering capacity and reduce GI discomfort. This presents a major potential benefit for athletes considering sodium bicarbonate as an ergogenic supplement, as GI discomfort is almost eliminated. Future research should determine if the Morten bicarb system is performance enhancing. Keywords: sodium bicarbonate, extracellular buffer, ergogenic aid, acid-base balance, supplement. Key points. The novel bicarb system, MSB, reduced and almost eliminated the gastrointestinal discomfort compared to vegetarian capsules, CSB. The changes in acid-base balance following ingestion of the MSB were significantly greater compared to CSB. It is unknown if this would translate to increased performance benefits. However, and the next step, therefore, is to determine the performance responses from MSB. The increase in blood bicarbonate was sustained greater than 5 millimole per liter blood bicarbonate for longer with MSB ingestion versus CSB. This might suggest there is an ergogenic window, and ingestion timing could be therefore be flexible prior to exercise. Background. Sodium bicarbonate is a recommended supplement to improve exercise performance, with the more recent International Olympic Committee supporting its use in doses of 0.2 to 0.4 grams per kilogram of body mass. Whilst the use of sodium bicarbonate is generally supported by peer-reviewed evidence, sports medicine practitioners and athletes, one major drawback is the onset of gastrointestinal discomfort following ingestion that affects some athletes. Common side effects include stomach ache, bloating, belching, diarrhea, and in severe cases, vomiting. In one severe case, Kale et al. Previously reported that 10 out of 11 participants suffered from diarrhea following ingestion of 0.3 grams of sodium bicarbonate per kilogram of body mass, dissolved in a solution. As the solution form of sodium bicarbonate seems to elicit the greatest severity of GI discomfort, some practitioners, athletes and researchers have opted to encapsulate the sodium bicarbonate inside digestible capsules such as gelatin or cellulose in order to try to limit the GI discomfort. Additional attempts have also been made to find solutions to the GI problems with the use of delayed release and enteric coatings capsules and tablets. These methods are designed to bypass the exposure of the exogenous bicarbonate to stomach acid, and in so doing, reduce the likelihood of bloating and other GI symptoms. These studies usually use an ingestion dose of 0.3 grams sodium bicarbonate per kilogram body mass, and they result in acid-base changes that are typically ergogenic, greater than 5 millimole per liter blood bicarbonate. But GI discomfort is still present in some individuals. Even with enteric coating capsules, multiple participants report moderate bowel urgency, diarrhea, and flatulence. In recognition of these issues, further work has investigated lower doses, 0.2 grams per kilogram body mass, of sodium bicarbonate in solution or capsule form. However, GI symptoms are often still reported. Despite some successes, there are still some practical limitations with supplementation, as firstly, a solution form of sodium bicarbonate lacks palatability, and secondly, capsule ingestion requires circa 20 to 25 large capsules to be ingested for a 75 kilos athlete. One further strategy to reduce GI symptoms and allow sufficient acid-base changes to occur is the method of ingesting sodium bicarbonate split across multiple times in smaller doses. This is usually complete across the pre-exercise and initial exercise phases when ingesting sodium bicarbonate, although this can logically be difficult depending on the time of the event, for example in the morning events, and how easy it is to administer sodium bicarbonate during exercise, especially for short duration events. Based on this evidence, it is reasonable to suggest that the existing strategies have failed to adequately reduce GI discomfort and to make it simultaneously practical and convenient for use in exercise contexts, as this could be a barrier to ingestion. As a result, further strategies are required to reduce GI discomfort. One such strategy is a recent release commercially available sodium bicarbonate-based product that purports to provide potentially ergogenically significant increases in acid-base balance and is ingested just once prior to exercise, always reducing GI symptoms. This product, known as the Bicarb system, Morten Gothenburg, Sweden, uses a carbohydrate gel to deliver sodium bicarbonate mini tablets that are small enough to allow passage through the pleuric sphincter, thereby avoiding disturbance of stomach acid. Other methods, such as vegetarian capsules, CSV, must be recycled through the antral meal prior to passing into the intestine, which subsequently leads to sodium bicarbonate dissolving in the stomach and causing GI upset. In theory, this Bicarb system, MSB, removes the logistical burden of ingesting large amounts of capsules, and with just one ingestion point, could make it more practical than splitting the doses. At present, it is unclear what the GI symptom or the blood acid balance responses are to MSB ingestion. Therefore, the purpose of this study was to assess the acid-base balance and GI discomfort responses following the ingestion of 0.3 grams sodium bicarbonate per kilogram body mass using the MSB compared to CSV in well-trained cyclists. Methods. Participants. 12 well-trained cyclists were recruited for this study, age 30 plus minus 7 years, body mass 77 plus minus 5 kilos, Maximal rate of oxygen consumption 66 plus minus 5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Peak hour output at maximal rate of oxygen consumption 423 plus minus 90 watts. Weekly training was at least 3 sessions for at least 5 hours. And all had a minimum of 2 years training experience. No participants were ingesting other intra or extracellular buffering substances at the time of the study. All participants provide right and informed consent to take part in the study, and ethical approval was granted by the Institutional Ethics Committee, Birmingham City University. Approval number 10651, date May 22. And the study was conducted within the ethics of the Declaration of Helsinki. Data collection was undertaken between January and July 2023 and at the Birmingham City University. Study design. Participants attended the laboratory on 3 separate occasions in a randomized crossover double-blind design study. Participants completed an initial maximal oxygen consumption test and then 2 trials to determine blood acid-base balance responses to ingestion of 0.3 sodium bicarbonate per kilogram body mass. Constraints on alcohol and caffeine were placed on participants 24 hours prior to any trial, and nutrition intake was monitored and replicated for 24 hours prior to each trial using the snap and send photographic verification method. Trials were conducted at a similar time of day, plus minus 2 hours, to account for circadian variability. Experimental overview. The initial visit consisted of a maximal rate of oxygen consumption test using a protocol previously used with trained cyclists. This was conducted to determine training status for participant characterization. Participants complete a warm-up, 10 minutes at 50 watts on a cycle ergometer, and then performed graded exercise test to exhaustion, with increases of 25 watts per minute. All participants keep a consistent cadence of between 85 and 95 revolutions per minute. Oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide, and respiratory exchange ratio were measured continuously using a breath-by-breath gas analyzer. Determination of maximal rate of oxygen consumption was defined as the highest plateau reach, that being 2 successive maximal readings within 0.15 liters per minute. Heart rate were recorded continuously through using a chest-based heart rate monitor, and rating of perceived exertion, BOR 620, were recorded every second minute, every 50 watts stage. Finally, finger capillary blood lactate was taken pre and post exercise. All maximal rate of oxygen consumption tests met the set criteria for achievement of a valid maximal test. Participants then attended the laboratory on 2 further separate occasions. Approximately 2 hours prior to the trial, participants were encouraged to ingest 2 grams per kilogram body mass carbohydrate meal to mimic the practice of trained cyclists in training and competition. Following the dietary recall, participants ingested 1.6 grams carbohydrate per kilogram body mass, 18 gram protein, 11 gram fat, totaling 665 calories. A fingertip capillary blood sample in a heparin-coated glass saline tube was taken for analysis of pre-ingestion acid-base status, where blood pH, bicarbonate, sodium, chloride, calcium, and potassium were measured immediately following collection using a valid and reliable blood glass analyzer. Participants then ingested 0.3 grams sodium bicarbonate per kilogram body mass in either vegetarian capsules, circa 1 gram per capsule CSV, or the novel bicarb system, Morten Sweden, MSV. A hydrogel carbohydrate product was also provided with both formulations of sodium bicarbonate containing circa 40 grams of carbohydrate, Morten Sweden. The comparison treatment was vegetarian capsules following consultation with multiple world-class athletes and sports nutritionists who highlighted this is the most common approach in practice. Following ingestion, acid-base balance responses were measured using repeal capillary blood samples every 30 minutes for a period of 300 minutes. During this time, participants were resting quietly and were permitted to ingest water ad libitum, and this was recorded. Gastrointestinal discomfort was also monitored at the same time point of blood collection using a visual analog scale for nausea, flatulence, stomach cramping, belching, stomach ache, bowel urgency, diarrhea, vomiting, thirst, and stomach bloating. Each individual symptom was scored out of 10, with 10 representing most severe symptoms and 0 no symptoms. Participants were permitted to ingest water ad libitum, and this was replicated for each trial. Finally, at the end of the trial, to complete a supplement belief questionnaire that assessed if they could detect which supplement they had ingested. This was based on a 0 to 10 confidence score initially. This was based on a 0-10 confidence score initially. 0 no confidence, 5 not sure, 10 highest confidence, followed by identification of which supplement they had. A confidence score greater than 5 was considered that the participant could detect which supplement they had ingested. And this was then compared against the true treatment for correct or incorrect identification. Statistical analysis. All data were assessed for normally using a Shapiro wheel test and visually inspected using box plots. One outlier was subsequently removed from the analysis of the blood bicarbonate data, having been identified on the box plot via the Turkey method. Blood acid base, blood bicarbonate and pH, and electrolyte, sodium, calcium, potassium, chloride parameters were analyzed using repeated measures, analysis of variance over the pre- and post-ingestion period. Post-hoc tests were conducted using Bonferroni pairwise comparisons to determine possible differences between time points within trials and between conditions at each time point. By adding this command to the syntax of the analysis, effect sizes were calculated using partial eta squared comparisons between peak blood bicarbonate response and the duration of time which blood bicarbonate stay more than or equal to 5 millimole per liter above the baseline value between ingestion types were determined using per t-test, with H used to calculate the effect size. Gastrointestinal symptom severity totals, ratings of thirst, and ad libitum fluid intake were analyzed using a Wilcoxon test, as were comparison of blood bicarbonate time to peak following each ingestion strategy. Effect size for the Wilcoxon test were calculated using R, where R equals Z divided by the square root of N. Effect sizes were interpreted as small, 0.01, medium, 0.06, or large, 0.14, for partial eta square, and has a small 0.2, medium 0.5, or large 0.8 for G and R, as suggested by Colin. All data were analyzed using SPSS, and statistical significance was determined as P less than 0.05. Results. Blood bicarbonate concentrations became elevated following ingestion in both conditions. F equals 66.18, P less than 0.001, partial eta square equal 0.87. But these changes occurred to a greater extent following MSV. F equal 21.88, P equal 0.001, partial eta square equal 0.69. In the absence of a condition per time interaction, F equal 1.76, P equals 0.077, partial eta squared equals 0.15. These changes also result in increases in blood pH. F equals 21.68, P less than 0.001 partial eta square equals 0.66. And after 120 minutes, they remained elevated for the remainder of the protocol. But there was no difference in the pH response between the ingestion conditions. F equals 0.57, P equals 0.466, partial eta square equals 0.05. Nor there was a condition per time interaction. F equals 0.97, P equals 0.472, partial eta square equals 0.08. The change response was highest following MSB. Mean difference equal 0.95 millimole per liter, T 2.25, P equal 0.023, G equals 0.61, and occur more rapidly. Z equal 2.23, P equal 0.26, R equal 0.67 after ingestion. 117.3 plus minus 36.6 minutes. That after CSV ingestion. 155.5 plus minus 35.8 minutes. Furthermore, the duration at which the change in blood bicarbonate concentration remained greater than 5 millimole per liter was also significantly longer following MSB ingestion. Mean difference equal 42.5 minutes, T 1.88, P equal 0.043, G equal 0.51. Blood sodium concentrations were the only electrolyte that increased in response to sodium bicarbonate ingestion. F equal 2.76, P equal 0.041, partial eta square equals 0.20. But there was no main effect of condition. F equal 1.69, P equal 0.220, partial eta square equals 0.13. Despite quick changes being observed at 60 minutes, P equals 0.012 and 90 minutes, P equals 0.03, following MSV and CSV ingestion, respectively, and no condition per time interaction. F equals 0.55, P equals 0.847, partial eta square equals 0.05. Blood sodium remained elevated 300 minutes after ingestion of MSV, P 0.012, but sodium had returned through pre-ingestion concentrations in CSV. The post-ingestion responses of the other electrolytes were characterized by decreases in calcium, F equal 19.94, P less than 0.001, partial eta square equal 0.64, potassium, F equal 15.67, P less than 0.001, partial eta square equal 0.59, and chloride, F equals 10.71, P less than 0.001, partial eta square equals 0.49. There was also no observed main effects for the ingestion conditions for calcium, F equal 0.64, P equal 0.442, partial eta square equals 0.06, potassium, F equals 0.01, P equals 0.937, partial eta square equals 0.001, or chloride, F equals 1.84, P equals 0.203, partial eta square equals 0.14. Despite pairwise comparisons identifying minor variations in the responses, only blood chloride had returned to a concentration not significantly different to pre-ingestion following CSV, but not following MSV, which remained lower, P equals 0.001. No condition per time interactions were observed for either calcium, F equals 0.85, P equals 0.586, partial eta square equals 0.07. Potassium, F equals 0.97, P equals 0.476, partial eta square 0.05. Or chloride, F equals 0.68, or chloride, F equals 0.68, P equals 0.739, partial eta square equals 0.08. The mean GI symptom severity responses for each symptom were greater following CSV, and these were reflected by the significantly lower total GI symptom reported by following MSV. Z equal minus 2.903, P equal 0.004, R equal 0.92. Diarrhea was eliminated with MSV, despite the response being observed in CSV, and considerably reduced all other symptoms which were observed in CSV. Aggregated GI symptoms totals peak between 16. Aggregated GI symptoms totals peak between 60 and 120 minutes following CSV ingestion, but no peak was observed following MSV ingestion. The mean fluid intake following sodium bicarbonate administration was 1.10 plus minus 0.65 liters and 1.04 plus minus 0.73 liter in the CSV and MSV condition respectively. But this was not affected by the method of delivery. Mean difference 0.04 liters, T equal 0.364, P equal 0.362, G equals 0.11. Mean thirst ratings 8.00 plus minus 684 arbitrary units and 5.42 plus minus 633 arbitrary units for CSV and MSV respectively, were unaffected by the method of delivery of the sodium bicarbonate. Mean difference equal 2.58 arbitrary units, T equals 0.516, P equals 0.314, G equal 0.18. 5 of the participants reported headache symptoms following CSV, but no such symptoms were reported by any participant following the ingestion of in MSV. Only one participant reporting no GI symptoms with CSV reported a higher total GI symptom score following MSV. For all other participants, GI symptoms were lower following MSV ingestion. Out of all the participants, only one participant could detect the supplement correctly for one trial. 5 trials were guessed incorrectly, with the remaining trials identified as unsure. Discussion. This study aimed to assess the acid-base balance and GI discomfort response following ingestion of MSV, Morton bicarb system, and CSV in well-trained cyclists. Firstly, the findings suggest that the Morton bicarb system can significantly reduce and almost eliminate GI discomfort compared to a more traditional method of sodium bicarbonate ingestion, i.e. CSV. Secondly, the Morton bicarb system induces a significantly greater level of alkalosis compared to CSV, which suggests increasing buffering capacity is possible with the Morton bicarb system. Although the relevance of this additional increase over CSV in the context of exercise performance is unknown, based on the evidence, the Morton bicarb system might offer considerable practical benefits to athletes as they can increase their buffering capacity sufficiently whilst avoiding the problematic GI discomfort response typically experienced from other forms of sodium bicarbonate ingestion. Indeed, this study reports for the first time that the Morton bicarb system appears to reduce GI discomfort to a greater extent than other previously reported GI symptom alleviating methods, including enteric coating capsules. Importantly, in this study, a comparison with CSV was also undertaken, consumption of which was associated with much greater frequency and severity of GI discomfort. For example, one participant suffered 9.4 out of 10 in severity for stomach cramp with CSV, whilst in comparison 0 out of 10 following MSV. Equally, another participant suffered 10 out of 10 severity for diarrhea, but no symptoms, 0 out of 10 with MSV, which was also the case for 3 other participants. Generally, all symptoms of GI discomfort were reduced following the Morton-Bicarb system, but this was not the case for perceptions of thirst. This was likely due to the equimolar sodium load for each supplement that was used during the study. These results support the claim acting mechanism of absorption through the pleuric sphincter sample time for the CSV, P less than 0.05, which leads to minimal disruption of stomach acid-base balance and of carbon dioxide production, resulting in near elimination of stomach-related side effects. Due to the design of the present study, it is not possible to directly determine the effects of the hydrogel carbohydrate provision on either GI symptoms or the pharmacokinetic responses following administration of the sodium bicarbonate. Provision of carbohydrate alongside sodium bicarbonate has previously been shown to reduce the severity of the GI side effects. What is clear is that when this hydrogel carbohydrate product is consumed simultaneously with either MSV or CSV, the MSV Morton-Bicarb system results in considerably reduced GI symptom severity and frequency. This product, therefore, has the potential to provide athletes with a practical method of ingesting a dose of This product, therefore, has the potential to provide athletes with a practical method of This product, therefore, has the potential to provide athletes with a practical method of ingesting a dose of potentially ergogenic sodium bicarbonate without the concern of causing GI upset. What is yet to be determined is if the Morton-Bicarb system is also ergogenic. Participants with historically severe GI symptoms from sodium bicarbonate might now be able to improve their performance with less likelihood of upset. Therefore, future studies need to investigate the efficiency of the Morton-Bicarb system on a variety of exercise types. Now, it is clear that GI symptoms issues are unlikely to inhibit performance. The increase in blood bicarbonate following Morton-Bicarb system ingestion was high enough to suggest an ergogenic effect is possible, given the chain response was circa 8 millimole per liter, which is far above the 5 millimole per liter threshold suggested to be required to elicit an ergogenic effect. This is the first study to report this finding, and it is possible that the change has been seen from a new sodium bicarbonate product. Considering others, such as sodium bicarbonate lotion, has no impact on any acid-base balance variable, or enteric coated sodium bicarbonate, which typically produce lower change response values. The increase was also greater for a longer period of time across the 300 minutes testing window compared to CSV, whereby blood bicarbonate was greater than 5 millimoles per liter for circa 38 minutes longer, and the absolute change from baseline was circa 1 millimole per liter greater following MSV ingestion. Furthermore, with blood bicarbonate being greater than 5 millimole per liter for longer, this could suggest that a potentially ergogenic window is available following ingestion, as seen in previous vegetarian capsule data. These two interesting This is potentially of practical benefit to the athlete and a sport medicine team, as less pressure for the exact timing of peak alkalosis might be required. It is also important to note that despite difference in blood bicarbonate between MSB and CSB, there was little difference between the electrolyte responses, sodium, potassium, chloride, and calcium, following sodium bicarbonate ingestion in the study. This means that if the potentially ergogenic mechanism is derived from the changes in these electrolytes or the changes these ions have on the strong ion difference, then there is likely no difference in the expected benefits to exercise performance. The very high mean increases in blood bicarbonate of almost 3 millimole per liter over the likely ergogenic change response threshold of 5 millimole per liter suggest that it may also be possible to use lower doses of sodium bicarbonate, as this will also likely still increase blood bicarbonate to a sufficient level. This will also have benefits in that would reduce the sodium load with ingestion, as 0.3 grams per kilogram body mass is far above the recommended daily amount, and sodium bicarbonate is commonly loaded on both consecutive days and even multiple times per day, such as a competition weekend. It is important to note that this experimental study was conducted in controlled laboratory conditions in the absence of any exercise, and therefore has some important limitations. It is likely that in a competition setting, for example, that factors such as warm-up, preparation phase, and potential changes in anxiety could impact either the blood or GI discomfort response. In this initial study, it was important, however, to determine the blood acid-base balance changes following MSB, given that the individual time to peak blood bicarbonate could be an important factor to improve the ergogenic effect. This is an important first step in determining the pharmacokinetics of the MSB ingestion strategy, and doing so in a laboratory setting allowed a greater level of control than in a field setting. Now, this study has been complete, and the acid-base response of the MSB have been determined. It is important that future studies investigate the effects of this strategy on exercise performance and the effects of ecologically valid pre-exercise routines, such as warm-ups and environmental factors, for example, racing, heat, hypoxia. This is to ascertain if the response are similar to those exhibited using other more well-established ingestion strategies. Conclusions. This study reports that a novel sodium bicarbonate supplement, the Morten Bicarb system, induces acid-base balance response that are similar to traditional methods of sodium bicarbonate, CSB, whilst almost eliminating GI symptoms. With the near elimination of GI discomfort, athletes can now be confident that they can ingest the Morten Bicarb system, MSB, prior to exercise without the deleterious impact of GI discomfort, and in a manner that only requires one intake to induce blood alkalosis. Further research is now needed to directly quantify the potentially ergogenic effects of this new supplement ingestion strategy on a variety of exercise types.